They told American soldiers it was just routine testing. No weapons, no danger, just basic equipment trials. But behind closed doors, a different experiment was unfolding. Soldiers were secretly dosed with powerful mind-altering drugs, designed not to heal, but to break the human mind. And the worst part? They never saw it coming. Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland, headquarters of the U.S. Chemical and Biological Defense Command. The military was attempting to create a non-lethal weapon, something that could incapacitate enemy soldiers without necessarily killing them. At Edgewood Arsenal, they began developing psychoactive compounds. They decided their best candidate was a substance known as 3-quinaclidinyl benzylate, or BZ. BZ was developed as a stomach medicine. However, side effects like confusion and hallucinations meant it never received FDA approval. But it was precisely those side effects that interested the Army. The team now faced a problem. Where would they find people to test BZ on? The Army gave them permission to recruit volunteer soldiers from around the country. Recruiters told the troops they would be testing equipment. The Edgewood team wanted to record exactly what happened to the volunteers on BZ. They constructed a mock communications outpost and filled it with cameras to document their experiments. The team dosed 4 volunteers with varying amounts of this horrific drug to observe how these young men would react while under its influence. They tested them across a broad range of scenarios, including simulating a poison gas attack. The peak of the compound's physical effects was reached within 4 to 6 hours, while the peak of mental incapacitation came several hours later, when a simulated chemical alarm sounded. The initial results seemed promising. The men were distracted, disoriented. It looked like BZ could be the non-lethal weapon the Army had dreamed of. Soon, however, the BZ testing took an ominous turn. Ronald Zadrozan, the soldier given the highest dose of BZ, experienced a drug-induced psychosis for 36 hours and suffered lingering effects afterwards, including nervousness and panic attacks. Other volunteers were also badly affected, but the Army decided the experiments should continue. In November 1964, the Edgewood team was ready to test BZ outdoors. They chose Dugway Proving Ground as a secure site for this, since it was isolated and far from prying eyes. Perfect for secret experiments. The men suited up in the pre-dawn cold and were then doused with the gas. These unfortunate troops were exposed to choking amounts of BZ gas for 15 minutes. Afterwards, the disoriented volunteers were taken for evaluation. The test confirmed that BZ could incapacitate soldiers, rendering them unable to fight. The Army was convinced of BZ's potential as a battlefield weapon. Back at Edgewood, testing on BZ variants continued. In 1975, after details of CIA LSD experiments leaked, President Ford instructed Vice President Nelson Rockefeller to investigate. The Rockefeller Commission began reviewing the Army's controversial experiments, and in June 1975, they interrogated Army officials about the Edgewood program. When congressional investigators asked what had been going on, the Army readily admitted that BZ testing had been ongoing for years. They confessed that somewhere between 2,100 and 2,900 volunteer soldiers were subjected to BZ during the course of their experiments. BZ was not the only drug tested. The U.S. Army dosed some 7,000 unsuspecting soldiers with more than 250 different chemical agents. The volunteers were not told what they were testing, meaning they could not give informed consent. In effect, the soldiers were treated like lab rats. Lawmakers were understandably furious. In 1975, the BZ research program was shut down, but that did not stop U.S. intelligence agencies from developing other methods to manipulate the human mind. The CIA began an experiment with a top-secret goal: to find drugs capable of controlling human behavior. It would become one of the government's most notorious projects. Its name was MKULTRA. CIA Director Allen Dulles faced a major concern. At the time, there was widespread fear that American prisoners held by North Koreans were being subjected to brainwashing. The CIA suspected that communist forces might be using mind-altering drugs not only to extract information, but also to reprogram captured American soldiers. The CIA believed one of these drugs was a new compound called lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. LSD had been discovered in 1943 by Albert Hofmann at Sandow's laboratories. It was still largely untested but appeared to have great potential as a mind-altering agent. Dulles initiated a program to explore the brainwashing potential of LSD and other psychoactive drugs. It's important to understand the sense of urgency that gripped the United States during the early 1950s. Dulles sought a silver bullet, a magic potion that could break down a subject's mental defenses and expose hidden truths. The CIA hoped to use brainwashing on spies, foreign prisoners, and even foreign leaders like Fidel Castro. Dulles appointed chemist and poison expert Sidney Gottlieb to run the program. Gottlieb spent $240,000 buying as much LSD as he could find. He went to Sandoz and offered to buy their entire supply, cornering the market on the drug. Thus, Gottlieb became America's first government-authorized drug dealer and brought LSD to the CIA. Gottlieb decided the best way to evaluate this powerful psychedelic was to test it on humans across the country. MKULTRA funded 149 research projects at 80 institutions. The CIA never lacked money. In fact, cash was one of its most potent tools. Among the institutions involved were 44 colleges and universities, as well as hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, and even prisons. A wide range of drugs became the focus of these experiments, and all kinds of unwitting people were used as test subjects. For example, at a federal prison in Kentucky, inmates who had previously been heroin addicts were unknowingly given LSD for 77 days straight. This placed them in a drug-induced schizophrenic state. These were not good trips. In 1957, Gottlieb enlisted Canadian psychiatrist Ewan Cameron. Between 1957 and 1964, Cameron conducted a series of horrific experiments for the CIA, attempting to break down and rebuild the human mind using LSD and other brutal methods. Cameron would soften up his patients with insulin-induced comas and then expose them to LSD and psychological torment. His subjects were unaware they were part of a CIA experiment. They were ordinary people seeking psychiatric help, and they left the program mentally broken. Gottlieb also took some of his most extreme experiments overseas. The CIA established secret detention centers in Asia and Europe, far enough from congressional oversight to avoid detection. There they experimented on suspects such as captured foreign agents. These subjects were referred to as expendable. MKUltra ran for 20 years. We still don't know how many people were affected or how badly they were harmed. Ultimately, the CIA failed to discover a reliable method of brainwashing, and the project was canceled. Gottlieb retired in 1973. Knowing how damaging the program's legacy could be, Gottlieb and outgoing CIA Director Richard Helms ordered the destruction of all MKUltra records. Gottlieb personally transported boxes of documents to CIA archives for shredding. However, he failed to destroy everything. Some documents survived and would later resurface. In 1975, Congress launched an investigation into the CIA, exposing programs like MKULTRA. Gottlieb testified before Congress but claimed he remembered little about the experiments. He faced no punishment. The CIA officers who participated likely believed the United States was at war and that normal rules didn't apply. In their eyes, the mission was more important than the laws of God or man. The truth was buried, but not erased. Subscribe now to uncover the darkest corners of the unknown.